Hello guys and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of Sony's strangest devices. This is the second generation Sony Vaio P, which is a tiny laptop released in 2010. Now this thing was quite expensive when it came out, and it still commands a high price tag secondhand because they are quite rare. And thankfully I was kindly given this to borrow by a guy called Douglas here in Adelaide. So without further ado, let's take a look at this really cool tiny laptop. Back when this laptop was introduced, it cost about 1,500 Australian dollars and rocked a 1.86 GHz dual-thread Z540 CPU. Even though its size was tiny, there were two different input methods, the nub-like track point and the tiny touch-sensitive area to the right of the screen, which acts like a conventional trackpad. However, like many sub-notebooks that use this particular pointing nub, there is an annoying amount of drifting, which makes the mouse cursor move to the corner of the screen all on its own. The problems don't stop there though. The left side of the display has occasional glitching that happens randomly, but when it's working, it's a nice looking panel. A very wide panel, I must say. Pushing the low-powered graphics even further is the ridiculously high resolution for such a small display. At 1600 by 768, you're really going to need some good eyesight to see this thing without modern scaling. There aren't many options, and honestly anything but the native one looks pretty horrible. But at least it fits inside a pocket, so it has that going for it. And in the hand it's pretty comfortable to hold and a good weight at just over 600 grams. As far as I'm aware, even though this originally came with Windows 7, a lot of people at the time installed the far less demanding Windows XP, which makes sense given that this is such a low-powered device. So before we take it apart, let's try playing some games to see just what it can do. There's honestly something so relaxing about the Windows XP startup screen. And while the internal speakers don't work, using the headphone jack does give us a dose of that sweet, sweet XP sound. This is one of the earlier laptops to use solid-state storage. I was curious to see just how fast it is. However, I was shocked to see that the read and write speeds were only 50 megabytes per second. The SSD could very well be failing though. Anyway, it played old school RuneScape in small window mode totally fine, although it's very hard to see at such a high screen resolution. And expanding it to fill the whole screen brought on a seriously choppy frame rate. I mean, if you were really desperate, you could play this. Since we're in Windows XP, I'm legally obligated to play some Space Cadet pinball. Many a good time was had playing this back in primary school. A game that's even older is Sonic 2. I'm playing this off of the Sonic Mega Collection CD released for computer. Even though the image is being stretched a bit to fill the very wide display, it still looks fine and runs great. The downside to such a low wattage processor and weak Intel GMA 500 graphics is that anything 3D that's remotely demanding is absolutely unplayable. Another one of my favorite games is Star Wars Battlefront 2, which is also unplayable, even on the lowest settings possible. In Grand Theft Auto 3, we can see that it once again struggles greatly. But if we go all the way back to the 90s, things run a whole lot faster, which makes sense given that Monster Truck Madness 2 was designed to run well on a 200 MHz Intel Pentium of the day. And back when I used Windows XP as my main OS, my favorite color scheme was silver, and my favorite background was not in fact the iconic Bliss wallpaper, but Azul, a photograph taken by Bill Ross in 1991. Now here comes the interesting part, opening up this little machine. Now Douglas did give me permission to do this, but either way I'm going to be very careful because I've never opened one of these devices up before. First of all, I gave the outer casing a wipe down with a healthy dose of eucalyptus oil. Overall, this unit does present pretty well aside from some minor scrapes on the display and chips in the white exterior paint. The battery is thankfully easy to replace as well as remove. Larger capacity packs were available back then as well. Getting into the Vaio is pretty straightforward, only requiring a Phillips head screwdriver. Some of the screws are hidden under small rubber covers. The first pair are the ones on either end of the base of the keyboard. With those removed, the keyboard assembly can be slid down and lifted up. You've got to be careful as the fragile connectors for the keyboard and track point are still attached. It also appears that someone else has mangled the release mechanisms here as well. I wanted to try and clean the track point out, hoping that it's just become lodged with debris over the years. I wouldn't even know where to buy a replacement if that had to be done. I'm hoping I'll be able to fix it. It definitely looks a bit grubby, so time to clean it out. And while I continued taking apart the Vaio, I let this soak in some isopropyl alcohol to hopefully dislodge any corrosion. Since these are so hard to come by, Douglas had to source this internationally, but sadly the previous owner had opened it up for whatever reason and the left mouse button doesn't click anymore and the sound doesn't work, so we're going to see if we can work out why. And I may have found why the left mouth button wasn't springing back after a click. The plastic that acted like a spring had snapped off after years of use. While I had the affected button removed, I thought I would clean out the orange gunk underneath. I then glued the broken plastic button back in place. This alone wouldn't have enough strength, so I added small strips of plastic to form a hardened structure when the glue dries. To get in further, there are many more screws holding the backplate on, and the second set of hidden screws can now be removed. This gives me access to the last few screws under this bit of plastic. We also get to see one of the tiny speakers, which don't seem to be producing any sound. It could very well be a driver problem, not a hardware one. After getting this far, I finally get to see what's inside one of these pocket-sized Sony Vaio laptops. It looks like a cobbled together mess of PCBs and ribbon cables, not an elegant layout, that's for sure. As much as I'd like to take it apart further, the device doesn't belong to me and I don't think there's anything I can improve by stripping it down further. I did actually notice some corrosion on one of the pins of the display connector. Perhaps that was causing the screen issues we saw earlier in the video. To clean it off, I used some isopropyl alcohol, which did wonders to get the pin looking as shiny as the other ones. Before putting the case back on, I went around the edges to remove the gunk that had made its way in between the casing. To help keep the hinge screws in securely, I used a small amount of thread locker. Hinge screws can easily loosen over time if you don't apply this. And since the adhesive holding the rubber feet on had lost its stick, I applied a tiny dab of glue. After putting it back together, I'm glad to see that the display issues are fixed and that the pointer nub exhibits next to no drifting now. Considering this came out the same year as this far cheaper netbook, I thought I would compare them. At 634 grams, the Sony Vaio is exactly half the weight and nearly half the volume. And when it comes to CPU performance, they're both sporting similar Intel Atom chips. And in a 2010 version of Cinebench, they score nearly identical over several runs. What it lacked in functionality, it's somewhat made up with style. You don't see many laptops with a leather carrying case. I'm not 100% sure this is real leather, but apparently, just like the laptop, it was very expensive, but it does indeed keep it nice and protected. Considering the main attraction to this device was its portability, even back when this came out, the battery life was pretty poor. So that means if you're going to be doing some serious work, you're going to have to be lugging around the charger or one of the optional larger batteries, sort of defeating the purpose of having such a small little laptop. And it's not too surprising that this was, as far as I know, Sony's last attempt at such a small, compact laptop. Reviewers at the time were also critical of its performance shortcomings and major fundamental flaws. And really, what sets it apart from a tablet or a smartphone is the fact it has a physical keyboard. But it's quite small, not making for a good typing experience. Trying to use the Vaio for web browsing was also quite a slow affair. It struggled to load nearly every modern website I tried. For many years, the thought of owning a laptop that could fit into your pocket seemed like an awesome idea to me, but sadly, it's largely a concept that's been forgotten due to smartphones and their ever-increasing popularity. Thank you so much for watching. It's honestly been really fun using this old device, and I never really thought I'd ever get my hands on one. And also big thank you to Douglas for letting me borrow this and a number of other old laptops and computers. If you want to see more, definitely consider subscribing, and if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like. I'll see you in the next video.